Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Nurgle in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And what I want to talk about in this video is both the good and the bad of Nurgle's campaign dynamics. And where I think Creative Assembly really missed the mark with Nurgle in terms of racial design, and in general a kind of perspective on how a campaign should be as opposed to what a campaign actually is. Because clearly there is a design intent behind Nurgle from day one, from Realms of Chaos, that never really worked out in Warhammer 3. But let's talk about how Nurgle works and what the problems are in the context of a Warhammer 3 campaign, or just a Total War campaign, because it's not just specific to Warhammer 3. It's always worth keeping in mind. Some of the issues, or pretty much all of the issues of Warhammer 3 have been there for years, if not 2 decades. So, if we look at Nurgle, you have global recruitment. You only have global recruitment of units. You have a pool of units that you can summon anywhere on the campaign map. And that means that you can get a huge amount of unit variety in your campaigns, regardless of where you are. So you can range far afield from your base, as long as it's in a secure location, and still be able to recruit high-end units. This is great, because it means that you don't have a dynamic like in many other campaigns, where you either have to stop, use global recruitment, which takes longer, is more expensive, or you have to recruit a lord back at base to send units to the front. Now, you're still going to benefit from recruiting things back at base because Nurgle corruption makes it cheaper, sure, but you can absolutely rely on recruiting on the front line, especially given the way corruption works right now, where you can max out corruption in a province by just capturing quickly, especially if it has 3 or 4 settlements. So that is a good dynamic. Another good dynamic is the way Nurgle works in terms of heroes. So heroes can all be recruited at tier 2. You have 2 different buildings. One takes 4 turns, the other takes 2 turns. And you recruit a good amount of heroes for this. And you can increase the capacity of heroes at tier 3. This works for major settlements and minor settlements. This means that Nurgle can run around with a lot of unit variety and a lot of heroes in a campaign. And because of the way the cycle buildings work in a Nurgle campaign, you will inherently have more units, more varied units in your armies as Nurgle than in most other cases. It's actually a nice idea. And this is the thing about Nurgle. I can understand the intent of the developers. There's reasons why it doesn't work out, at least given the way they've balanced things. So it's a balance issue, not so much a design issue. So technically speaking, you would, or theoretically speaking, you would have more unit variety with Nurgle than you would in other campaigns. Here's the reason why flat out doesn't work on multiple levels. First off, you do have the climate problem. So Nurgle should theoretically have a good climate situation, because you have most climates available. You don't have desert, you don't have ocean, you don't have magical forests or mountains as being pleasant. Many races would have a fantastic situation in their campaigns if that was the case, climate-wise. But it does hurt Nurgle, because every Nurgle campaign, be it Epidemius, Kugath, Tamarkand, do have to deal with mountains far more so in their campaigns than most other races do. Imagine playing a dwarf campaign effectively, or a greenskin campaign without mountain climate. You can kind of start understanding the problem. So that in itself would be a limiting factor, but then you also have to understand that Nurgle recruitment structures are fairly expensive in terms of infections, and it does take a good amount of time to construct things for Nurgle. And then you have to wait for the cycle. So climate may seemingly look good on paper, but in practice it ends up being a fairly limiting factor, even though it's just one climate that's affecting it. Just one bad climate ends up hurting Nurgle campaigns far more so than it does in the vast majority of campaigns in the game. This is because of the way the buildings work. So every military building takes 4 turns to construct, or those are basic military buildings, or 6 turns in the case of the advanced military buildings. And then you have to wait for that cycle. You can speed that cycle up with infections, but that's where we get into the big problem of Nurgle. See, the way you gain infections and the way you spend infections. Infections are gained post-battle, but it is a specific post-battle loot. You occupy a settlement, sack a settlement, you choose a specific option to get post-battle. Otherwise, you get a couple of infections up to 25 from a structure, from tier 3 structure in settlements. Simply put, this is not enough for your need. So I'm guessing the developers wanted to limit Nurgle in a way so that they wouldn't end up being completely steamrolled in the map. But on the flip side, you end up in the situation where you have a limitation of infections, you have a limitation on military construction, and the reason this is especially bad for Nurgle is Nurgle can vassalize for diplomacy, but it's one of the worst vassalizations of diplomacy that you may have during the course of a campaign, because it's just going to take you that long. Like diplomacy, a lot of diplomacy does work based on the idea of selling settlements with barracks. Since your barracks costs infection, takes 4 turns, you're just doing that slowly, more slowly than other people. You can do it, but you're also, in a lot of ways, in the Nurgle campaign, just waiting for time to pass. I especially like Epidemia's faction icon, because it's like a Nurgle background, but with an hourglass right in the middle of it. That is the quintessential Nurgle campaign experience. Hurry up and wait for turn after turn after turn. And you end up with more limited armies, or if you do have a lot of armies, you're doing your best to bypass the restrictions on infection. So you're recruiting lords, you're recruiting heroes. And while Hero Doom stacks have always worked in the game, when one of the principal campaign ideas that you have going for you is just recruit a bunch of heroes, recruit a bunch of lords, have those stacked together and obliterate everything in front of you, that makes things far less interesting. Since Rome 2, especially, Creative Assembly has tried to limit how many armies you'd have, how fast recruitment you'd get, and it's never really worked out in Total War. One of the good things about quite a few races in Warhammer 3, the way they work right now, is that they've moved past that. So they have a fast-paced campaign, which means more usage of actually interesting unit, more interesting decisions in a campaign, as opposed to just let me wait to get infections, I'll just kill some guys, get a bunch of infections, get military structures. And that would be a problem if all we were using infections for would be military construction. But we're not just using infections for military constructions. I think from the perspective of military construction, the way they could fix it is if they change the basic construction of a barracks chain, all the barracks chain to gold. But if you want to speed up the cycle, you could spend infection. That would go a really long way, though then you'd have financial issues. But still, you can get a good amount of money in the Nurgle campaign, so that's not really the problem. But the infections are a serious limiting factor to deal with. But wait, there's more. Then you also have research that requires infections as well. And it's pretty powerful research, but you're looking at the cost of a barracks or an advanced military barracks to unlock some of these things. It says a lot that just these two research that cost infections, or just this one in particular that costs 200, can be such a limiting factor. Because you need up to 600 infections in order to unlock it, beyond all the infections you're going to need for military barracks. So this is a kind of campaign design. It's like you have one army, it's limited. If you lose, that's it. GG, well played, right? It isn't a great style because it inherently limits what you can do in a campaign, how much flexibility you have. It also means that the way these armies do work out, for anyone that's ever fought, like Tamarkan in particular and Bell, it means individual Nurgle armies can be exceptionally strong, but it's just the one army or two armies. And this will carry over throughout the course of a campaign. Between the infections of research, the infections on structures, the construction times, the climate situation, the dynamics of each specific campaign, you end up with a limited toolkit. One of the reasons Tamarkan is the best legendary lord for Nurgle is he gets away with ignoring that because, one, he starts near ogres, so ogre mercenaries are a thing. Two, he gets the chieftain units. So I understand where Creative Assembly was coming from, but it's clear to me that Nurgle was more designed for like a Realms of Chaos campaign where the developers really wanted you to spend 160 turns playing that campaign. Really, that's how that campaign is designed. Just keep in mind 150, 160 turns. It's something that affects the cast dwarves, and it is something that does affect Nurgle. It is quite a shame because I could see like how Nurgle could be a lot more interesting and better if they didn't have all these issues. But then there's the final kicker over here. Plagues. So one of the key campaign mechanics of Nurgle campaigns, especially for Kugaf and really so for Epidemius, because you do need to spread a certain number of plagues around the world to other factions in order to unlock this top bar, and it is annoying. The best that I can come up with is literally declaring war on factions, taking settlements, and then selling them to other factions so it counts as it. But you're still spending infections, and it's a lot, because especially if you're playing on higher difficulties with, plague immunities and resistance to plague. A single plague can cost up to 650. You can reduce the cost. There's ways around that, sure, but that is a huge amount of infections. And keep in mind how many plagues you need to maintain in a campaign like Epidemius, and how many plagues you'd actually want to maintain. Like, it is this idea, well, we'll give you fewer armies, but you can make those armies more powerful, and you can get a bunch of buffs and debuffs for the enemy. It teeters on the brink of being rubbish and broken. In the sense that it will literally get Nurgle banned in multiplayer. It's not quite there because of the limitations. But the problem is, like, if you had a lot more plagues, that would be insanely broken. Because if you had infinite plagues, infinite armies, and as many armies as Skaven, for instance, sure, I understand how that would be broken. But there should be a better middle ground than limiting recruitment or limiting armies. Limiting recruitment, limiting armies, limiting plagues, limiting research. Limitation after limitation after limitation in a campaign. Flexibility is king. Oh, and let's not ignore the fact that you will want a good amount of growth in Nurgle campaigns. You will want a bunch of factions, so you're always going to get that growth building. You're going to get faction building. You want the hero capacity buildings, so you actually end up with few building slots for the sake of income buildings. So money can be an issue unless you're abusing region trading, which in itself is now one of the best dynamics that a campaign has. And the fact that you're spending one resource for everything, it's kind of similar to how Beastmen, which can certainly work in a campaign situation, but how Beastmen end up being completely broken to play or miserable to play simply because they're using that one resource, Dread in their case, for that thing, right? This is the reason why if you want a good Nurgle campaign with the plagues and you want to really use them, you should play Festus for Warriors of Chaos. The reason Festus is much better, one, he has more unit flexibility because he's got the undivided units as well, but he doesn't have the same limitation on unit recruitment, though he actually has limited armies. Like, that's the thing about Warriors of Chaos. You look at Warriors of Chaos, you have limited armies. You're not just running around with 20 armies, right? You can eventually, but you're gonna win a campaign with limited armies. But you look at Festus's campaign, you can use a lot of plagues without having the limitation of on recruitment. And you're also not reliant on stacking heroes and lords in order to make the campaign work. And in fact, you can't really stack lords and heroes in the same way Nurgle can. Because Warriors of Chaos do have severe limitations on how many heroes they can get in a campaign. So, in a lot of ways, like, if the idea of Nurgle was to push for a playstyle of limited armies, it didn't work out because we can get a lot of armies, just heroes. If the idea was forcing you to make interesting choices between plagues and recruitment and research, again, it didn't work out. But you can look at Warriors of Chaos. Sure, Warriors of Chaos broken. This is the thing, though, about Nurgle. Nurgle campaigns are not hard. Like, even dealing with Malisar played as Epidemius is pretty easy. The only reason you deal with him is because it requires your victory condition to kill him. But if you didn't have to kill him, you could easily vassalize him. And in fact, it might just be best to ignore the victory conditions and just go for the vassalization initially. Get all that sweet, sweet Dark Elf money in a campaign. Because it will give you a tremendous amount of power if you go down that path. It's very easy. Just go find Malice's enemies early on, ignore your own, and then turn around and deal with that, basically. And you will end up being more powerful. But it does feel like a very gimmicky, limited playstyle, and I think like Total War in general should move past that kind of mentality. Is a similar mentality like Dwarves had, but now Dwarves are freaking awesome because choices, flexibility, power. But here's the thing about Dwarves. You might think Dwarves are an OP broken race. They're not. Like, there's more broken races. Like, if you look at multiplayer communities, you know what they ban? They don't ban Dwarves. Or Chaos Dwarves. They ban Be'lakor. For a good reason, I should add. They ban Khorne. Okay, that's largely due to the Bloodhost bullshit that you have there. Unlimited movement range, which, yeah, or the significant amount of movement range. But they ban those kind of things. They don't ban a race like Dwarves, which can be ridiculously powerful, because Dwarves do have limitations in certain ways. Especially when you're, player versus player, right? That's the kind of context I'm talking about. Nurgle, I mean, they don't ban Nurgle usually, but that's just because you can get so many things faster than Nurgle that, yes, a high-end 80-turn Nurgle campaign will probably demolish most things, but they're not going to get there, basically, or rarely will get there. And I think that CA should, in general, not just with Nurgle, I wish to stress it out, this is not just about Nurgle, it's this entire design philosophy of limited armies, long-ass campaigns with the enter and button simulator. I mean, I suppose it makes sense for Epidemia as he has a literal hourglass in it. It's thematic, I guess, but it is something that I think CA should move from. Questine signing out.